Saquon's just that's tough. I mean, I understand what the Giants were going through there. In the sense that I'm a big Penn State fan. I watched a lot of Saquon's plays over the last bit of time here, and boy, I mean, transcendental player out of the backfield. He can give you so many options. I worry about him in the NFL. He's not the biggest of guys, but he's got all the skills. I think in that moment, just like when we talked about a few weeks back when I was throwing out these crazy ideas of do the Giants trade back with the Bills for maybe a LaShawn McCoy so that they can, the Bills can draft a quarterback high, Giants filling that running back role. I mean, running back was still a very, very high need on the Giants. In fact, I had this same argument with one of my buddies he's my buddy that's a Chiefs fan, and he listens to us and we go back and forth all the time. I asked him about Denver. What if there's, Rosen and Allen and these guys still there when Denver picks at 5 and a guy like Barkley is still there? And I said, should they take Saquon? He said, absolutely not. They need to take a quarterback. I said, well, they just paid Case Keenum. Why do you pay Case Keenum and then also draft a quarterback with a 5th pick so that you don't pick again later on and don't have another, skill position until later on? My feeling is, to answer this question related to the Giants, is sort of the same as that philosophy with Denver. You have a serviceable quarterback in play. It's not like Eli's not going to start. It's not like Case Keenum's not going to start. So you don't just draw another quarterback and fill a roster spot that you really already have a starter for the future. I don't think you're in that spot yet. I think for the Giants, you say, okay, yeah, Eli's probably got 2 or 3 years. We will address that quarterback position, and we don't know. Maybe Eli gets traded in 4 months. I mean, there's things that are going to go on that we aren't aware of, but you got to take a skill position that high if he's a transcendental player. And so now you have Eli and Saquon on the Giants rather than just Eli and a quarterback who's going to play in a couple years.
I think I agree with that point, and I kind of changed it based on how the draft went, because you saw Buffalo and Arizona get to move up and not really give up a lot. Arizona went from 15 to 10, really swapped first and gave up a 3 and a 5 to get their quarterback. Well, that's really not paying a lot. So I think even next year or the following year, I think if the Giants want a quarterback, I think they can trade up and get somebody. And so I don't think there's this need to get there, because Buffalo was able to do it with really only trading 1 first-round pick. They didn't give up their second one. They actually traded up further in the draft with that pick and picked up another player. So I think for...
Who's to say they don't trade Odell?
Yeah, so I think, and you've seen, look what the Patriots did by trading Brandon Cooks. They got themselves another first-round pick that, the speculation was they were going to make a move because they had 2 firsts. So I think it's not that hard to build up the ammunition. If there's a guy that you're locked in on, you basically just trade your first and move up. Trade your first next year, or if you get some 2s or 3s, package them together and move your way up.
And let's not forget in that conversation, to your point, is that, okay, they take Saquon second this year. Look what the Ravens just did by grabbing Lamar Jackson at the end of the first round, or what the Steelers did with Mason Rudolph very late in the draft. We all know how late Aaron Rodgers went, how late Tom Brady went, how late. I mean, so you just don't know. You don't have to sell the farm for the quarterback.
You don't need somebody in the top 5 just to be successful.
No.
I mean, I know that the numbers would prove there's a better chance they're going to be a Pro Bowl type quarterback, but that doesn't mean that Mason Rudolph sitting there as a 3rd-round pick under Ben for the next 1, 2, 3 years isn't going to learn enough where he steps right in and performs very well. I mean, did anybody think Tom Brady was going to do that as a 6th-round pick? No, but if these guys, Pittsburgh had Rudolph graded very high, so they sit there and basically give up nothing. If he's a complete bust, guess what? It's no different than if you bust taking a linebacker or a wide receiver in the 3rd round.
So I got to ask you, Justin, because we really railed on the Jets a few weeks ago. One of our listeners out of Manhattan, Nick, he is a Jets fan like me, and we go back and forth on this. So shout out to Nick. Got to know the Jets. We talked about how they sold the farm to move up from 6th to 3rd, and all speculation was that was the move that they needed to grab a quarterback. Pretty risky, because if the Browns take one, which they did, and if the Giants take one, which they didn't, which helped the Jets, but they got Darnold. So Justin, now revisionist history, we've got hindsight is 2020. Are you okay with how much the Jets gave up, knowing that what they received was Sam Darnold?
Well, if Darnold works out, then yeah. I mean, if that's the guy that they wanted, if he was graded highest on their board and they made those moves up to get him, if he turns out in 3 years where he's a Carson Wentz type player and they're fighting for division titles and they're into playoffs, no one is going to remember what they gave up to get him. Does anybody remember what Atlanta gave up to get Julio? No. If he would have been a bust, everybody would have remembered because the GM would have been fired. So if they got the guy they wanted and he turns out to be the player that they thought, it'll turn out to be a great move. The problem will then be that they could have sat at 6 and got Josh Allen, had him fall to them, or even Josh Rosen at that point. So that will be the only time as a Jets fan, I think you might look back if Darnold's not very good by year 2 or 3 and go, what the hell were you guys doing? You could have had one of these other guys and you wouldn't have had to give up all these picks and could have put better players around him. So that's the problem for us as fans. We look at this stuff and we see these moves and we sort of overreact, but we've never even seen these guys on an NFL field. We have no clue how they're going to play, how they're going to translate from college to the pros. And that's what the problem I have with this whole grading system of trying to figure stuff out. And it's hard to talk about what the worst moves are that teams make. But I got to tell you, the most puzzling move that I saw in the first round was what the New Orleans Saints did. When they jumped up from 27 to 14 to get that pick from Green Bay, they trade their first from next year. I was watching NFL Network's coverage, and they all thought like, oh, this has got to be Lamar Jackson. You just don't give up a first-round pick. And then they take...
Here comes the future at quarterback.
They take a pass rusher in Davenport from a small school in Texas.
Like, who?
And they're like, well, this guy's got some ability, but he's really raw. And they think that he could put him over the top. I thought at that point with New Orleans, a team that's perennially in salary cap hell, they couldn't sign Jimmy Graham because they didn't have enough cap room. And now you waste a first for next year. I was just mind blown by that move.
The only thing I can figure is that they want Davenport to play pass rusher. Then they want to turn him around the other side of the ball and fill that tight end spot. They want that maybe he's going to play 3 or 4 positions for him. I don't know, but I was the same way. I'm thinking, okay, here comes Lamar Jackson. Here comes the future after Drew Brees. They call his name and I'm like, I don't think I've really even watched this guy play.
Well, no, he's from like UT San Antonio.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, everybody talks about, oh, you can't take Josh Allen because he's in Wyoming and he doesn't play. Does anybody really watch it? I don't watch a lot of UT San Antonio football. I mean, what's that on? Like ESPN 12? I mean, that just blew my mind.
It's on ESPN, the Alamo.
I guess apparently it is on there. Kawhi Leonard must watch that when he's actually in town. But that move confused me because even if that guy works himself out, next year they don't have a first-round pick. So you talk about your window being very close with Drew Brees. I don't see how that really takes them over the top. I mean,
no first-round pick next year when Drew Brees is even 1 year closer to being a dinosaur?
I guess the Arizona Cardinals may call at that point. I don't know. That was just a perplexing move for me. And even what the Raiders did, you kept seeing these teams get all these picks for moving back. The Raiders dropped 5 spots back, and they get a 3rd and a 5th. I was even confused about that I thought that was a steal for Arizona. I mean, I know that there's a lot of questions on Rosen and that he had fallen to that point, but I thought for Arizona, that was a gamble worth taking. They need a quarterback.
Oh, absolutely.
They really didn't give up a lot to have to go get him. And if he works out again, like a 3 and a 5 is nothing for a quarterback that you can plug and play eventually, because Sam Bradford's going to get hurt and there's no way they could keep Mike Glennon on the field. So Rosen's definitely seeing the field this year. If that guy works out, I mean, a 3 and a 5 is nothing to move up. I thought Oakland really could have gotten more. I thought that was just a strange transaction to see.
What surprised you outside of New Orleans, which I agree with you. That middle of the first round, you're thinking, okay, now we're going to start to see some action. We might see the Patriots do some things. They had those first round picks. You might see some of the teams in the back, Cincinnati, or some of the teams that had those mid-20s picks do something. We did see that with New Orleans. That was certainly a surprise. Outside of that, though, Justin, was there anything else in the first round that kind of got your attention as like, wow, I didn't really see that coming?
I thought Green Bay did a great job. To be able to get a first next year, add 2 corners to their team, that's been a position of weakness for them. I thought they had a really aggressive draft, and you can sort of see the changing of the tide with getting a different GM in, getting someone else running the front office differently, a different sort of mindset for them. I think anytime you can add pieces you need and add potential picks, because Aaron Rodgers isn't going away. I mean, we're talking about guys playing into their 40s now. So you look at and say, well, Rodgers probably has another 6-7 year window. Let's put as much youth and young guys around him as we can. And when you can acquire more first, it's just ammo to be able to go all over the draft and get really good players. So
You mean they took good corners later in the draft? They didn't have to get one at 4th like the Browns?
No, I mean, we'll see how it works out. But yeah, I mean, there's quite a few corners. I mean, Denver's got a really good one in Chris Harris Jr. That guy was undrafted. So it just proves that there's talent out there all over this draft. I just think you've got to try to take the best player on the board. I'm not sure that Cleveland did that. That's what puzzling. I know for their fans, they probably hope that it's going to work out. Last team we'll talk about, Eric, we've spent some time in the last couple episodes talking about New England. As fantasy players and daily fantasy players, we should have known New England was not going to do what we thought they were, and that was draft a quarterback early. I didn't think they were going to wait till round 7. I told you it kind of felt like LeBron, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5. No, we're going all the way to round 7 and get Danny Etling out of LSU, and I'm sure he'll probably end up being some great backup that they'll trade for a first-round pick in 3 years. But the Patriots had a pretty good draft. Add a running back. They added some of the pieces that they had lost in free agency. But is this kind of playing too much with fire with Brady's age and really not having a backup plan? Is Bill Belichick's sort of ego and genius going to come back to bite him?
Absolutely. We're starting to see the notion that this outthinking yourself, this chess match becoming too much of a burden on Bill Belichick, the New England team as a whole, the way that they're sort of strategizing and over-strategizing. I play a lot of board games with some of my friends at these strategic board games. I'm not talking about Candyland or Monopoly or something. But
have a Candyland and Checkers night?
These strategic board games, these Euro games that require a lot of choice and consequence, a lot of strategy, a lot of resource management, money management. What you find in that is that you can't have it all, and so you've got to dial in the best long-term strategy possible to win the game. What you can get at, though, is analysis paralysis. You can sit there and outthink yourself and outsmart yourself. I think that's what New England's starting to do. You wait that long to take the replacement to Tom Brady after you've already shipped Jimmy Garoppolo away. Brian Hoyer, we know, is no saving grace in anywhere he's ever been.
Ask the 49ers.
And so now you're going into yet another season with Tom Brady 1 year short of his 90th birthday. Somehow he's still able to lift his arms above his head and put his shoulder pads on and his helmet and everything else. But, I don't know what's going to happen with him long term. And your backup plan as a dynasty over the last 15 years is Brian Hoyer and some guy you got in the 7th round. It's ridiculous. I don't know what they're doing. I think Belichick's ego it's just getting enormous. You saw that with the Super Bowl last year. We talked about with Butler. I mean, you can't outthink yourself constantly, or you get analysis paralysis, and eventually you actually end up losing. You don't win because of it. You lose.
Look, they had the pieces there. There was a lot of quarterbacks available in this draft, really from round 3 on. I thought that they would take, either Rudolph or Falk or one of those guys. I was kind of surprised they waited till round 7 to get someone. Look, they've had success in developing quarterbacks, but they've always been earlier guys. It always seems like 2nd, 3rd round has been the guys after Brady that they've always sort of developed. When you think back to Mallett and even Matt Castle and then Garoppolo, they've always been, not the initial round 1 guys, but they've always been that middle tier where those guys just sort of get lost in the shuffle, and they've been able to develop them. But you just saw Brady, out in California with Jim Gray talk about the fact that he doesn't feel appreciated by this team. And you've heard, Amendola leave and Gronk's tweeting him congrats, freedom and all this other stuff. There seems to be a lot going on in New England behind the scenes. And I don't know who's driving it. Is it Kraft and Brady have a relationship? Does Belichick feel like the odd guy out? Is Brady mad because of all that he has sacrificed, and now he and his trainer and the TB12 method is vilified by Belichick, and the players want to go to Brady's guy, but then the team doctors aren't. It's just such a mess there right now, and it's constant news. It's not just one little blurb that was a story. This is like a where there's smoke, there's fire. This seems like behind door 1 is a raging inferno, and it's all held in place by Brady in his 40s, hoping that he lasts for them. If he goes out, they're done. I know a lot of teams that have a superstar quarterback, they can't survive because the backup's just such a step down, but they're so far away. Garoppolo's not coming through that door, and I just think that it's gonna fall apart. Brady is one hit away from this team being out of contention, and it feels like It's just irresponsible not to try to replace him, especially with having that many picks early in the draft. And you see what the Patriots